It felt as if time stopped. Marvin was so focused on the work that he lost a sense of everything around him, including James. The walls of the room seemed to disappear. The table floated away. There was only the page and the ink and fortitude. He worked quickly, making fluid, delicate strokes. The girl took shape before him, with her strong back, her muscular arms. The lion collided with her in a sinewy, angry mass. Marvin moved back and forth between the original and his own drawing, checking proportions and scrutinizing the smallest details. The lace trim of the girl's gown, the plume of the lion's tail. The center of the paper blossomed in a dense crosshatching of fine brown lines. James said nothing, watching wide-eyed from inches away. Marvin drew and drew. His eyes burned from concentrating on the drawing. His legs ached. "It's been an hour," James whispered at one point. "They'll be back soon." Finally, exhausted, Marvin wiped off his front feet and collapsed on the edge of the paper to survey his work. "Oh!" James gasped. His face split in a huge, wondering grin. "You did it!" Marvin looked at his drawing. It was tiny and beautiful, bursting with energy and life. In every contour, in the least of its details, it was fortitude. He knew in his heart that he could do no better. He hoped it would be good enough. There was a quiet knock at the door. "James?" They heard Christina in the hallway. James looked questioningly at Marvin. Marvin ran across the table and onto James's wrist, ducking under his sleeve. I'm finished," James called. Christina, Denny, and Carl filed slowly into the room. They walked silently to the table and surrounded James, staring at Marvin's drawing. For a moment, the room was so still it seemed frozen. Christina spoke first. "Do you know what Dürer said?" she asked, and Marvin could hear the emotion in her voice. "The treasure secretly gathered in your heart will become evident through your creative work." She paused. "This drawing is beautiful, James. It's more than a copy. You've made it Dürer's, but also your own." Beneath the jacket cuff, Marvin shuddered with joy. "It's amazing," Denny said, shaking his head. "Truly amazing. I wouldn't have believed it possible if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." "Do you hear that, buddy?" Carl threw back his head and laughed as if happiness were bubbling up inside of him and forcing its way out. "You're wowing the experts now. I'd call this a masterpiece." James blushed, biting his lip. He turned to Christina. "Do you think other people will believe it's the real thing?" he asked. "I don't think so," Christina said firmly. "I know so." "So what do we do now?" Carl asked. "You don't do anything," Christina said, smiling at him. "But I have a great deal to do. I have to arrange for a burglary." Carl's eyes twinkled at James. "Something tells me a masterpiece is about to be stolen." Chapter 22. The Fight. Christina said it would take at least a week to work out the details of the burglary. She cleared her plans with the museum's director, the FBI Stolen Art Unit, and the New York City Police. "That took some convincing, I can tell you," she said. But there were still certain details to be resolved. Denny was working on getting clearance from the Getty, even though the real fortitude wouldn't be at risk. "Nothing will happen until next week at the earliest," Christina told James as he and Carl prepared to leave. Marvin looked longingly at his finished drawing. What if he never saw it again? James appeared to be thinking the same thing. He turned to Carl and tugged his father's shirt. "What if something goes wrong and we never get it back?" he asked. Carl looked at Christina. "Well..." There's always that danger, she said soberly. She crouched next to James and took his hand. Her fingers were so close to Marvin that he could have reached out to touch one. I'm sorry, James. I wish I could promise that your drawing will be safe, but I can't. James was quiet for a minute. Then I want to come back and see it one more time, he said finally. Marvin felt a wave of relief. Maybe he wouldn't have to say goodbye to Fortitude just yet. Then he looked at James in surprise, but Christina nodded understandingly. Of course. It'll be here in my office till next week. Why don't you come on Thursday or Friday? Can we, Dad? Please? Carl hesitated. I'll have to ask your mother, James. It's fine with me, but I don't know what her plans are. James bit his lip anxiously. Oh, I hope we can come. When they returned to the Pompadours' apartment, Mr. Pompadour swung open the door before they could even knock. Carl, he said stiffly, nodding, then beckoned James inside. Your mother's waiting for you. She has something to tell you. His voice crackled with excitement, which was such an unusual tone for Mr. Pompadour that Marvin emerged from James's coat sleeve, wondering what could possibly have happened. Oh, James said, looking confused. Dad wanted to ask her... Carl shook his head at James slightly. Another time, buddy. I'll call her tomorrow. He bent and pulled James against him, kissing him warmly. You did a great job today. A great job. Thanks, James said shyly. Carl took the pen case out from under his arm and lifted the lid. I'll just clean off that brown ink for you. He unseated the pen from its nesting place and stopped. Marvin froze. There was no brown ink on the pen, of course. The pen had never been dipped in Christina's jar of ink. Why hadn't they thought of that? Marvin groaned inside. It would have been so easy to do. Instead, the silver nib was shiningly free of ink from Christina's meticulous cleaning hours earlier. That's okay, James said quickly, grabbing the pen from Carl. I already cleaned it off. Carl looked at him strangely. But how? When we were back at the museum, James said. He shoved the pen back in the box and slapped down the lid. Mr. Pompadour muttered impatiently. Well, if that's it, Carl, we'll say good night. Sure, Carl said, studying James with a questioning expression on his face. I'll talk to you tomorrow, James. He started to back away, and then said quietly, Love you, buddy. I love you too, Dad, James answered, not looking up. Mr. Pompadour closed the door with a thud and herded James toward the living room. There, in the soft glow of the lamplight, Mrs. Pompadour was perched on a chair near the mahogany card table, with Marvin's first drawing, the little street scene, carefully positioned in front of her. Oh, finally, you're back, she cried, clapping her hands like cymbals. James, the most wonderful thing! I invited the Mortons over today to see your cunning little drawing, and what do you think? They want to buy it! James's eyes widened. Really? He asked. She rushed forward and grabbed James's arm, pulling him to the table. How much do you think they'll pay, James? How much? But you won't sell it, right? Marvin thought. I made that for you. James stared at the drawing. They'll pay money for it? I did tell them I'd have to check with you, but James, this could be your first sale as an artist, a real artist. Think of that. You'll be making more money than that father of yours in no time, Mr. Pompadour added, chuckling. Never thought of art as a lucrative profession myself, but you just may be onto something with these little pictures of yours. Marvin crept forward, trying to see James's face. It was a birthday present, he thought. James blushed, his eyes reflecting his parents' eager joy. How much? He asked. Oh, I want you to guess, his mother crowed. No, never mind. You'll never be able to guess. It's too much. $4,000. She clapped her hands again at James's shocked expression. I know. I never would have put such a price on it myself, but it turns out they've been looking for a miniature for their downstairs powder room, and this is perfect. For their powder room? Marvin turned to James in disbelief. Say no, he thought. Say you won't sell it. But James smiled, a wide, slow smile of amazement, and said, $4,000? That's awesome! Nobody at school will ever believe it. Then I'll tell them yes? And when James nodded, Mrs. Pompaday snatched him against her in a hug. Oh, James, I'm so proud of you. Look what you've made of yourself. Marvin inched back under James's jacket cuff in disgust. Humans. Money was the only thing that mattered to them. Not beauty, not friendship. Through the dense fabric, he could hear the Pompadays' muffled voices. Mr. Pompaday still chortling over the Mortons' offer, Mrs. Pompaday now urging James to take off his jacket and come into the kitchen for supper. I have to put my stuff away, James said. He walked down the hall to his bedroom, closing the door behind him. Immediately he peeled off his jacket and searched his arm for Marvin. Marvin couldn't bear to look at him. As soon as James lifted his wrist, Marvin crawled to the underside. When James turned his arm over, Marvin crawled to the other side again, out of sight. What's wrong with you? James asked. Do you want to get down? He rested his hand on the desktop, and Marvin immediately scurried across it, heading toward the wall. Hey, where are you going, little guy? James dropped his hand in front of Marvin, blocking the way. Do you need to go home? I can take you, like I did the last time. It'll be much faster. Climb up. Furious, Marvin veered around the boy's outstretched palm and toward the wall. He wanted nothing to do with James. What is it? James persisted. What's the matter? This time he settled his hand gently over Marvin and scooped him up, bringing him close to his face. He looked at him with troubled gray eyes. By now, Marvin was seething, not just at James's heartless sale of his drawing, but at the indignity of being so easily thwarted when he was trying to leave in a huff. He turned away from James, gathered his legs beneath him, and sank into a small, immobile black mound. This play-dead maneuver was a common beetle strategy in the face of imminent danger. Marvin had never used it before to show his anger, but he was beginning to realize that communication with humans required a large measure of creativity. You're mad at me, James said. Marvin didn't move.